Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you so very much for tuning in yet again. Today's show should be a fantastic one as we have made it to the end of the week, but for the first time ever in the history of the podcast, my player profiles are switching from the offensive side of the football to the defensive side of the football. Yes, for all you IDP nerds out there watching, this episode is for you. Every single segment will focus on a specific defensive player and why I believe they are an intriguing fantasy option for your IDP rosters. But before we begin and deep dive into all five of these exciting, exhilarating players, I do want to remind you yet again to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. It's a huge support to everyone concerned. We do also receive a ton of tips and donations, so if you feel so inclined, please consider leaving them at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. If you also have any burning questions, comments, or concerns about prior segments I've done on my show, or also ones I do today, please feel free to leave them there and they will be addressed at the beginning of the next episode. But without further ado, let's jump right into the IDP player profiles for today. And in fact, we'll stay on the screen to talk about our first player. Now, when I look at all five players that I chose to dissect for today's show, I can make the case that arguably at least 4 out of the 5 players are considered the top 4 or 5 players in the league in terms of their defensive prowess. And so this is going to be a very top-heavy episode, loaded with guys who are going to go very high in the draft, and this guy is no different. Perhaps the best linebacker in the league, we don't know yet. He's still young, and he's still improving, and he's on a defense that is constantly looking to make the most out of what they have in this young man, and that, of course, is Micah Parsons of the Dallas Cowboys. And so I generally feel like Micah Parsons is going to be one of those people who really steps up his game for the Cowboys at any given week, mainly due to the fact that at this current moment in time, the Cowboys defense looks as versatile as ever, mainly due to the fact that they have everyone at different positions, especially in their front seven, that can affect getting to the quarterback in different ways. What's interesting also at the 5 players I've selected is that, for the most part, they're getting new defensive coordinators, so there adds a little bit of mystery and intrigue as to how all these players are going to line up. But the biggest one that I'm not concerned about right now is Micah Parsons. So let's jump right into what makes Micah Parsons such a special athlete. Though his career has accumulated 478.8 IDP points, his best season, though, was his rookie season in where he accumulated 173.95 fantasy points. Last year was a very good year for him. He was nominated for the Defensive Player of the Year award. 40 tackles, 14 sacks, 40 solo tackles, 64 tackles, 14 sacks, 64 tackles overall. 7th in the league, and of course 1 forced fumble. Now, in the context of the Dallas Cowboys defense, this is where he really excites me as a player, Micah Parsons, because Mike Zimmer comes into the Dallas Cowboys as their new defensive coordinator, and what I see is that he's going to really focus on not just the versatility and coverage schemes, but the simulated pressures. He's going to use twists and stunts to use different guys in that front seven to create pressure to get to the quarterback. They've always kind of played a 3-4 system. They're really focused on power in the front 3 and kind of versatility and depth at the linebacker positions. And when you have a guy like Micah Parsons, he can really slot right in any position. And so what I really appreciate about the way the Cowboys are probably going to scheme around Micah Parsons, because we don't necessarily know what Mike Zimmer is going to bring to the table, is that they're really going to focus on allowing Micah Parsons to get to certain spots where he's not just, going after the quarterback, but he's becoming a smarter player. And in terms of caveats, I feel kind of weird saying that, but if they do that, I don't really have any with Micah Parsons, because this Cowboys defense is all about allowing different players to show off different attributes. You have guys up front like DeMarcus Lawrence, Asa Odighizuwa, who combine their strength with their speed and power. Asa Odighizuwa kind of coming in as the anchor, the defensive anchor up front. And you have guys on the back end who really make sure that these guys can get home. And Deron Bland, who had a career year in terms of interceptions, and Trayvon Diggs, who also had a career year just 2 short years ago as well in that category, who will make sure that the front seven is comfortable getting to the quarterback and have enough time to as well. And so, when you have that defensive structure that combines every single element of each and every one of your players to the best of their abilities, then a guy like Micah Parsons, who is more than just a hybrid role, is really heightened. And no matter what Mike Zimmer wants to do in this system, Micah Parsons is always going to be the danger man. You can have guys like Lawrence and Odighizuwa who can get to the quarterback, and that's fine and dandy. But Micah Parsons adds that extra level of attack because he can line up everywhere. He can line up off the edge. He can be in the linebacker position. I think that if there were any caveats that I would really nitpick on, it's his side-to-side coverage skills. He's not necessarily the best coverage linebacker in terms of his ability to A, clog the run lanes, and B, also defend the pass. But he's primarily so fearsome due to the fact that he's already on top of you before you can even get a pass off. And no matter what, Micah Parsons is such a force, whether or not Mike Zimmer wants to vary up this defense a little bit more. But at the moment, if they play the way they can play, where they offer versatility in coverage, where they're simming pressure, where you allow Micah Parsons to roam free, that's the beauty of the Cowboys defense. Which brings me to the caveat for Micah Parsons that probably is just going to be a small thing, especially for fantasy leagues as well. But there does seem to be a point in the season where the Cowboys defense does kind of stagnate. And maybe it's because, there's a lot of pressure building on that front seven to get home. And while there's definitely talent in terms of the secondary, and we've talked about that talent, I think that the secondary just wants to focus on allowing their players to get home. They believe that their front seven is so good that maybe sometimes they might lose focus on the fact that if you can get throws off in a timely manner and relieve pressure on your QB, then at some pertinent points you'll be able to pick and choose your spots as to how to attack this defense. And so that's my only worry. If there is that kind of stagnation where for some reason the Dallas Cowboys defense does not play up to par, then that's where I worry about Micah Parsons. Another thing that I'm kind of worried about with Micah Parsons is now he's kind of seen as not just a developmental player anymore. He's not in that learning stage where he's just trying to incorporate himself in this Dallas defense. And people will say he didn't even have to. He's at a point where he can be the leader of this defense. And at some points, I really like the confidence he brings. But sometimes he can become too hyper-focused on that confidence, almost to the point that it might be detrimental to the defense itself. Because you can have the drive to be a fantastic defensive player, but you also have to have the focus and ability to realize that there are 11 guys on the field around you. And at some points, you might want to... I'm not saying that Micah Parsons is not going to have fantastic stats next year. I believe he will. He'll be a fantastic IDP player for you. I think he's going to go in the first round, maybe even number 1 overall. But I just want to key you into the fact that Micah Parsons at this point in his career always has to learn how to create for others, because this defense for the past couple of years has started to kind of center around him a little bit. And maybe that's also the reason why stagnation is something that comes to mind when we talk about the Dallas Cowboys defense, because when a team relies on a young star, no matter how much talent he brings to that position, it can create this kind of big-headedness that's really dangerous when you have such a fantastic defense, so focused on each and every single player's elements combining to create a fantastic whole that's so collectively compact in the way they defend teams. And so that's my only fear with Micah Parsons, because I love that he gets the stats that you want, because stats are very important, especially in fantasy. But I also want him to be a mature player who can come into the system whatever Mike Zimmer presents to him and say, okay, I'm accepting of it, and this is what I have to do to ultimately help my team reach the heights that they need to succeed. It's not just about me at this point in my career. It's about DeMarcus. It's about Asa Digizua. It's about Duran. It's about Trayvon Diggs. So, overall, Micah Parsons is still going to go very high in IDP drafts. But just know that there are other players right now at the point in their careers who can say that they succeed outside of themselves. And that's what I want to see Micah Parsons do. That will just about do it for this segment. Coming next, we transition to another linebacker who is also in the reckoning to be the linebacker 1 in IDP as well. A guy who already has a Defensive Player of the Year. Tune in to find out who that is after the break on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind.